So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. We have a globally recognized attribution product that a lot of large customers use, companies like Machine Zone and McDonald's. And Mike, the last session, was speaking a lot about casino, and we have a ton of casino customers, people like Double Down Interactive, Big Fish, GSN, a variety. And what's interesting about the casino business is that they were the first to really recognize the feedback loop of if I acquire users who then spend money, I can keep on acquiring more users. And that's something everyone here knows. But 5 years ago, not everyone knew that. And there's this next kind of chapter of maturity that I think we're going through in the growth space. And it's really unpacking the insights from the data. It's not as simple as throw money in, money comes out, like it was at one time. You need to really unpack the detail behind what you're doing and the efforts that you're performing. We have a thing called a business value assessment, and we do this for our customers as a kind of summarization of the value we bring to them. And we effectively go through 5 key points in the business value assessment with each of our customers every month. We effectively prove to them the value that we're delivering every month. And what I'm going to talk about today is really just a subset of 2 of those points. So this is normally like a 100-page deck. Not going to go through that, but we're going to just hit on a few key things. And if you're interested in expanding on some of them, I'm happy to talk about it. And I'm going to open up some time at the end for questions if there's questions. But we take the position that attribution absolutely matters, but we equally take the position that every click or impression prior to the attributed click or the attributed view equally matters because they influence what eventually got attributed. And part of being in the business of attribution and having this real-time waterfall is that you have to have a full appreciation of everything that assisted that drove value to that final attribution. If you take a simple approach of saying, well, I just care about attribution, whatever the last click is, I'll give them the money, period, the end, you're going to have a limited horizon. And so I'm going to speak on influencer reporting. That's one of the things we're going to talk about today. Second thing is traffic verifier. We have a real-time mechanism to verify the content and quality of the traffic, and we can actually kick the traffic out in the system. And while that's a great technical capability that we have, it gets applied with what you understand about your data. You have to understand what types of patterns are interesting to you to know what you want to kick out and what you want to keep in. The third one, custom configuration. We've been talking about configurable attribution for 4 years. In the beginning, our competitors said configurable attribution isn't important. Our job as a measurement system is to be standard. But that's not true. Every advertiser has an IO, an insertion order, that's slightly different from the next advertiser because they have particular goals, particular objectives. Our job as a measurement company is to actually be able to codify in real-time technology logic the rules of what you have in your insertion order. And so you need to have configurable attribution because you need to be able to configure all the dials that are important to you as an advertiser. So we're going to walk through that as well. 2 things that we're not going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about fraud today, but also the intelligence suite. We have a mechanism that can actually rerun all of your traffic from the past with changed configuration rules as a what-if scenario analyzer. And we're not going to talk about that today, but it's a pretty interesting piece of tech. If you want to try a new pattern in user acquisition strategies, what you do is you just change your buying patterns. And then you hope to God you can remember what you did or how you did it so that you discover, was that a useful strategy? With our what-if scenario technology, you actually can take a period of time in the past, change some configurations, rerun all the traffic synthetically, and have it show you a delta report of how would life be different with this different configuration, with the control of what actually happened and how I paid my actual publishers. This what-if technology is really interesting. in terms of giving the power to the advertiser to decide what to do. This is what we speak about when we talk about the kind of hidden truth of data, if you will. So if you're talking about attribution, typically you say, you have an app, we've integrated all these sources, we make it unified, it's simple, life is good. But the reality is, that message is actually not that compelling because it's really just a commoditized data aggregator message, what that is. What I just described here is a data aggregator. We'll aggregate all this media source data into one picture. What we do at Kochava that's different from just a commoditized data aggregation system, if you will, what we do is we deliver ROI on your media spend. We are by far the most expensive measurement system in the market. There's no question. And a lot of people give us a bunch of flack for that. But we equally will impact your media spend by 7% on average. So is it worth to pay just under 1% of your media spend to save 7% of your media spend? Or would you rather spend 10 basis points of your media spend and lose all of that 7% of your media because you're not doing it very smart? And so fundamentally what we do is we build technology that leverages that data so that you're more effective with your media spend. At the end of the day, if you're not effective with your media spend, we haven't done our job, you're not doing your job. And so we drive this whole BVA and every way we look at the data in the context of that ROI. So the resolution's a little bit bad, but this notion of configurable attribution is really looking at this picture of a real-time waterfall that when an install comes in or a potential conversion comes in, we look at a variety of different kind of rungs in this kind of pachinko board that the ball is running through. And as it's running through, we're illustrating not only the attributed click, but also all of the different influenced things that happen prior to that. So an influenced click, an influenced impression. And if you're in the business of marketing, you believe that your marketing dollars have some impact on audiences, right? You wouldn't spend money on marketing if you didn't believe there was value in that. We would argue that the first impression of your fresh ad on a fresh audience is doing the hardest work in communicating your value. Every impression thereafter is really just reminding or re-engaging that message to eventually cause a conversion of some kind. So in this case, it's an install. But this is an interesting thing because the majority of this industry works on the basis of paying for audiences on a cost per install basis, right? Very rarely will you pay on a CPM basis, you'll pay on a CPI basis. And the false dynamic of that is that if you pay on a CPI, you think, I don't really care how many impressions you drive. I don't care how many clicks you drive. As long as you drive an install, that's all I care about because that's all I'm going to pay for. And that makes sense at some level. But here's the reality. We have, for every customer, an analysis of how many influencers there are to each unique install. So there's certainly a so if I were to describe this, 0 means that this particular ad network has no other influencers. No other network first clicked prior to this network driving a click, and it resulted in 984 installs. And so they had a 0 influencer source. You go all the way out here, 10 influencers. It means 10 different networks drove either a click or an impression prior to their click, and this is how many installs happened. Now, here's what's interesting. There is this really, especially when you pay on a CPI basis, really interesting issue around ad networks gaming attribution technologies, where they're just trying to be the last click in so that they get the bounty. Even if that click is not the result of your marketing dollars, it is simply the ad network gaming the system. And that's one kind of approach that ends up being an outcome of this process. And so it's important to appreciate, if I were to look at a few things here, I've got kind of our largest network here, just by size, This is an example from one customer. I've got my highest overlap here. So the most significant overlap, that means if you're my entirety of my audience that I can hit with every ad network, and I've got 5 ad networks marketing to all of you, the largest overlap means every one of those 5 is marketing to all of you independently. And so network 1 is marketing to all of you, network 2 is marketing to all of you, and it's a crapshoot who's going to be the last click in. And so the question is, which impression caused action? Well, you don't know if you don't actually unpack the data. And so you can't scale, and that's the point. If you blindly just look at it and say, well, it's just CPI, I don't really care, I'm going to throw money in the pot, you do not have a capacity to scale. And that's the question everyone wants to ask. How do I then expand this? Most unique is here. So while the volume is lower, they have the freshest inventory. Now, if you are foolish enough to buy on a CPM basis with a high overlap basis, you're probably competing against yourself across 2 or 3 different media sources, which is a really odd thing to think about in the context of like mediation technology and how that works. So understanding this data helps you scale financially to drive real results. So that same chart is this chart in a graph form. And we've got kind of these spectrums of installs, so attributed installs as an axis, and influencer installs as an axis. What you want is up and to the left because it's fresh, unique inventory. What you don't really want is a bunch of stuff out here or a bunch of stuff down here. Unless you analyze the data and you discover my influencer networks are actually driving a lot of awareness and lift, only to let the money get taken away from them with a last click ad network out there. That's a really interesting observation. These guys may be more important to you than you realize, but they're never getting paid. And guess what happens when they don't get paid? You lower down in the priority of the waterfall of their ad server. But they're actually doing a lot of work in promoting your app. And if you simply say, I just care about CPI, then it actually doesn't serve you very well. So the real question here is a question around reach versus saturation or uniqueness. And so today, you've got this kind of picture of, I'm buying on 3 networks, I have a tremendous amount of overlap here. What do I do if I want to scale this? What you really ought to do, you're always going to have some level of overlap. That's always going to exist because the world is only so finite. You really need to think about a new network that has limited overlap, or to do things like fractional attribution, so you pay the influencers their fair share for influencing a resulting install because they'll continue to drive that value, if that makes sense. Now, our tech can do that. To my knowledge, there really isn't any other tech out there that does fractional attribution. And so these are the kind of things that we've done in the system to leverage what we have in the data. This is another graphic of the same thing. This is actually a count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the number of influencers and then the quantity of installs by influencer. So on average, for this particular customer, we have 6 influencers for every install. So think of that almost like an index. If on average across all my media spend, I'm averaging 6 influencers for every install, and then I try out a new network, what's your objective when you try a new network? What are you gauging success as? Is it sheer number of installs? Is it LTV? I would suggest you should include in that evaluation how many influencers are they driving or are they relying on to every install, because it will help you appreciate the capacity that they have in unique reach versus just assistive supportive reach to your existing conversions. An ad network out there today has a world where they've got an IO and they've signed with you. That ad network, their job is to deliver on the IO. And in delivering in that IO, the IO may say, okay, over the next 45 days, I'm going to deliver, call it a reach of 1.2 million, right? For the first 8 days, you have this awesome velocity of fresh reach where you are hitting new eyeballs every day. And at some point, you hit the kind of saturation point of a particular network, and they're just re-hitting the same users over and over again, and it starts to guide out. So when you think about scaling your campaigns, it's really about what the hell happens here and how quickly you get immediate reach, and then how you manage your payouts to your ad networks over this flatline process, because it's still valuable, but are they high intent users if they're not responding right away? I would argue not. But they're okay to engage. They're okay to convert. But they're not that kind of most compelling audience that's there. Meanwhile, the ad network has to deliver on the I/O. And so there's a kind of a straight line that they want to show, but it's not necessarily fresh audiences that they're showing. And so all of this has to be put into a picture of, what are you spending? Our customers, our mature customers, are not simply doing a CPI buy. They're actually doing a composite where they're doing a little CPI with some people, a little CPM with others, a little CPC with others, but they're doing it based on the data. In some cases, they're arbitraging that buy, and they're saying, I know I can buy on a CPM basis for mobile web and create conversions, and it's far more cost effective than if I simply give someone else a bunch of CPIs and I've got some fresh eyeballs to do it. You need to look at that in that overall picture. Don't simply say, well, the way people like to work a CPI, the way I'm comfortable with CPI, I'm just going to do CPI. So the last thing I want to talk about is one or two examples of what we're doing around fraud detection and abatement. So detection and monitoring is one thing, stopping it is another. Some customers don't want us to stop it, they just want to see it. Other customers want us to stop it. And so we give the customer the control to do that. These are a handful of different methods that we use for our fraud monitoring, but I'll unpack a few of these. So we came up with this concept called mean time to install about 3 years ago, MTTI. And the mean time to install is the time from the last click that would have been the attributed click to the launching of the app. And you'd think, well, if you're clicking on an ad, are you not launching the app right away? You'd be shocked. It actually is always some window of time. And it depends on the type of app. Social dating apps have an MTTI average of under 2 hours. Financial services apps are 7 days. Because people feel like they want to get their finances in order, but I'm going to do it later. Right? It is a really interesting reality that you kind of put your head into it and you're like, it makes sense. So when we see an MTTI, we do it in the context of an app. We don't do it on some arbitrary rule across the ecosystem. So we normalize the model against your specific app. And then against that normalization, we see outliers. So if you're not buying incentivized traffic, and you see this weird anomaly where a lot of site IDs from a particular ad network are driving really quick MTTIs, I'm sure you can be quite confident that there's an ad network who is effectively blending incentivized traffic inside of the non-incentivized traffic. Now, to be fair, 99.9% of the time, it's actually not the ad network. It's a sub-publisher that's doing bad behavior. But they're doing it under the masquerading of that ad network. So it's bad for the ad network because of reputation. It's bad for the advertiser, but it needs to be monitored. And it's something that we do. But this is another example of that kind of hidden truth of the data. The other interesting one is kind of high click volume by a particular device. Now, this is a very simple, very clear-cut proof point of fraud. I mean, how many times have you clicked on an ad 12,000 times before you installed? Right? That's a very tired thumb that you're going to do that. And what's shocking is that these site IDs, while useful, because you can address who they are, once you catch a sub-publisher that's doing something like this, unfortunately, they just get kicked out of the ad network and they re-register under a different name, and they do it again the next month with a variety of different sources. So this is not something that you solve and forget about. It is an ongoing, constant monitoring. And if you are spending, because you're not analyzing the data, call it 5% of your media spend on a bunch of goofy traffic that's not even real, it's a problem. So one of the reasons why we don't charge for our product on a CPI basis is because we track impressions and clicks, and we think there's value in them. We keep that data in perpetuity. We don't delete it after 90 days, etc. Having that data means that you can analyze the data and you get value out of that analysis. And this is one of those examples. Another one is ad stacking. We're uniquely positioned. I would argue all the measurement companies are uniquely positioned, but we've taken advantage of this opportunity to see one ad at the exact same timestamp delivering clicks for a variety of apps from the exact same device. That is ad stacking. So there's an ad that's actually shown to the user, and when that user clicks on that ad, it not only tracks a click for that ad, it has all these fake ads that it also created a click for all these other customers. And because we have a lot of customers, we can see that publisher or that sub-publisher doing this bad behavior, and we can immediately flag it and kind of blacklist that site ID. This is a real one that has very, very big volume at scale. And so I talked a little about this traffic verifier. We have the ability to like turn on and off postbacks to networks based on the applicability of this stuff. I guess my takeaway to each of you is to say, love to unpack some of this if you guys have interest. All of this data is available to you if you've got the right tools and technologies. You need to think about that in the context of your scale. And the first part is knowing what's happening, and the second part is then acting on it and delivering against it. So that's what I have. I'll open it up to questions if I've got time. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Charles.